Hello and welcome to the Prospective Applicant recorded webinar for the Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections Grant Program offered by the National Endowment for the Humanities. I'm Al Carver-Cubic, a Senior Program Officer in the Division of Preservation and Access. For this webinar, I will be discussing the 2024 Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections Grant Program, or SCHC for short. I'll begin with an overview of the program, discuss the three levels of funding and what they support, and then move on to the application and review process. All the information I'm going to discuss today can be found on the program information page, found on NEH's website. From the home page, click on Grants in the upper menu, which will take you to an option to search by program or division. You can click on Division and Offices, which then takes you to the page that lists all of the divisions. Go to Preservation and Access, click on that. And then to the right is the list of all of our grant programs. Here's Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections. If you click on that, it takes you to the main page for the grant program. The 2023 report, Held in Trust, Transforming Cultural Heritage Conservation for a More Resilient Future, funded by NEH, identified extreme climate-related disasters as an existential and immediate threat to cultural heritage and its preservation. Cultural institutions are facing increased risk of loss and damage of cultural heritage associated with fire, flood, tornadoes, hurricanes, sea level rise and storm surges, and rising temperatures. Maintaining preservation environments for cultural heritage collections often results in high energy usage, contributing to climate change and the very risks that threaten collections. Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections grants help institutions plan for and implement environmentally sustainable preventive care projects that avoid, minimize, and slow deterioration and loss of collections using strategies that reduce energy usage and protect collections against disasters. This is one of the only grant programs in the U.S. that is encouraging museums, libraries, and archives to plan and implement preservation measures in environmentally and fiscally sustainable ways, while also anticipating and responding to risks posed by disasters, changing weather or land use patterns, and other location-specific risks. Your organization is ready to apply to SCHC if you have completed a basic preservation assessment that has identified preservation challenges, risks, and priorities for your collection, and you have established an environmental monitoring program to collect data on temperature and relative humidity within collection spaces. Basic preservation planning and assessments might include a general preservation assessment and plan, a collections assessment for preservation, an emergency plan, or a basic assessment of building and storage environments. These basic plans can be funded independently through NEH's Preservation Assistance Grants Program, which has a January 11 deadline. You can find an informational webinar for that program on its program page. Using priorities established through foundational preservation plans, applicants to SCHC should consider how to address long-term collection care needs and mitigate risk to collections in a collaborative and multidisciplinary fashion. Sustainable preservation strategies can take many forms, but should rely on best practices in environmentally sustainable and resilient collections care. A successful SCHC project demonstrates an understanding of preservation needs based on the collection materials, including the conditions, risks, and vulnerabilities of the collection, the local climate, rather than relying on prescriptive targets such as a constant or static temperature and relative humidity. You should have temperature and relative humidity data on the environmental conditions of your collection spaces. Your project should consider the characteristics and performance of the building in which your collections are housed, including the building envelope, mechanical systems, and their role in moderating interior environmental conditions. For example, you might discuss the impact of the local climate on establishing relative humidity and temperature set points and managing interior environmental conditions. You might also evaluate current and future risks to collections associated with climate change, such as average weather conditions, natural disasters, as well as other emergencies. Preventive care strategies ought to weigh initial and ongoing energy use, costs, and environmental impacts of potential preservation strategies while prioritizing passive and non-mechanical ways to improve and manage collection environments and risks. Passive measures might include sealing the building envelope to allow for more efficient HVAC operations, retrofitting cabinets to create microclimates for objects more sensitive to relative humidity changes, allowing for a wider range of relative humidity in storage and display spaces, changing lighting systems to more energy efficient systems, and installing window coverings to reduce thermal gain and UV exposure. For more information, check out the FAQ resource on the program page. There's also resources listed at the end of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Before explaining in further detail on the various levels of funding, I would briefly like to highlight ineligible activities. SCHC cannot fund general conservation or preservation assessments and other basic preservation projects that would be more suitable for other program preservation assistance grants for smaller institutions. You may also not undertake new construction or installation of equipment as a component of a new construction project, nor may you renovate or restore an historic structure when those renovations do not impact preservation of humanities collections housed in the structure. This program does not support digitization activities. For a full list of SCHC funding restrictions, you should refer to page 32 on the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Planning projects rely on a multidisciplinary team to solve complex preservation challenges. Planning can involve the drafting of space plans, risk assessments, testing, and modeling. Implementation level 1 projects support small to mid-sized institutions to address discrete preservation challenges, such as small-scale improvements to lighting or environmental conditions, using environmentally sustainable methods. Implementation 2 projects address larger or multifaceted preventive care projects based on multidisciplinary planning. You are not required to have a planning grant to apply for and receive an implementation grant. Many organizations self-fund the planning or complete it as part of a long-range strategic or collection planning process. Now let's go into more detail about each of the 3 levels of funding. SCHC planning grants support multidisciplinary and collaborative planning by teams of professionals appropriate to the project that can develop and assess environmentally sustainable preventive care strategies in your collection spaces. Teams may include architects, engineers, building or facilities managers, and consultants knowledgeable in environmentally sustainable preventive care strategies or disaster preparedness. You must include a preservation or conservation professional who works with collections on the planning team. Planning awards are up to $50,000 for a 2-year period of performance. Project teams should evaluate the nature of the collection, the performance of the building in moderating internal environmental conditions of temperature and relative humidity, the nature of the local climate and disaster risks, and cost effectiveness and energy efficiency of various approaches to preventive care, and the impact on the environment of the options being considered. This kind of multidisciplinary and collaborative planning is one of the keys to identifying sustainable strategies. There are a variety of activities that you might undertake for a planning project, and I encourage you to consider options listed on pages 2 and 3 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Highlighting some of those options, you might study the performance characteristics of a building and building envelopes to understand how they could better moderate collection environments. You might examine passive or non-mechanical and low-energy alternatives for managing environmental conditions in collection spaces. Or you could conduct a risk assessment to improve institutional resilience in the face of disasters resulting from current and future effects of climate change or other potential disasters. You might also measure energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. An example of a successful planning grant was submitted by the Eiteljorg Museum of American Indians and Western Art. The planning project is to develop a storage space renovation plan for their contemporary Native American art and customary collections to provide room for the collection to grow and continue to account for the cultural requirements of customary Native American art and cultural items. The project draws from the recommendations of a collections assessment for preservation, or CAP, which identified overcrowded storage spaces as a risk to the collection. The multidisciplinary team includes a collections manager, facility staff, a curator, a conservator, and an architect. The project includes an energy audit and HVAC system assessment, evaluating existing light fixtures for LED compatibility, and ensuring the most environmentally sustainable building materials and processes available are included in the final plans for renovations. Implementation Level 1 projects are intended for small to medium-sized institutions ready to implement smaller, discrete improvements to environmental conditions or other sustainable measures previously identified through a general preservation or collections assessment. These awards are up to $100,000 for a period of performance of up to 2 years. A multidisciplinary team is not required. However, projects must have a preservation or conservation professional who works with professionals on the project team. There are many ways to care for collections in environmentally sustainable ways and to protect collections against disaster, several of which are highlighted on pages 3 and 4 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. For example, you might use an Implementation Level 1 award to tighten the building envelope by sealing windows and doors, installing UV blocking window filters or shades, installing insulation or vapor-proof barriers. You might upgrade lighting systems, or you might install storage systems and rehouse vulnerable collections to reduce risk and/or improve energy efficiency and allow for greater temperature and relative humidity fluctuations in building-wide spaces. The Shaker Heritage Society received an Implementation Level 1 grant to improve the building's envelope and HVAC systems in the Meeting House at Watervliet Shaker National Historic District, the site's primary storage location for its collections. The project is based on an environmental monitoring survey, a mechanical and electrical assessment, and professional consultation on appropriately insulating the building. The project is to install an energy recovery ventilator onto the HVAC system and install insulation between the attic and the first floor. These activities will improve the building's collection storage environment and reduce energy consumption. The Implementation Level 2 category provides funding for institutions of any size to implement environmentally sustainable preventive care projects that address large or multifaceted preservation challenges. These awards are up to $350,000 for a period of performance of up to 3 years. Institutions must have completed a multidisciplinary planning project prior to applying, in which they have identified the preservation needs of the collection and developed implementation strategies. The implementation project team should also be multidisciplinary and must have a preservation or conservation professional who works with collections on the project team. Level 2 project activities are listed on pages 4 and 5 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. You might, for example, upgrade a building automation system to enable a more active management of HVAC systems, or recommission or install an HVAC system, or you might install renewable energy sources such as solar panels, wind turbines, geothermal, or heat pumps. An example of a successful implementation level 2 project comes from the Indiana Medical History Museum. This multifaceted project is to preserve the visual collections consisting of 500 objects. Through collections and building assessments, the museum identified proper preservation storage conditions as a chief need. Subsequent planning work by a multidisciplinary team of conservators, contractors, historic preservation professionals, and archivists established a plan to preserve the visual collections. The museum will improve the storage and environmental conditions for the visual collections by adding insulation under the roof deck, installing blackout window shades, renovating water-damaged walls and ceiling, and updating physical storage. The goals of this project are to gain physical control over the collections, reduce energy costs and consumption, and mitigate damage to collections due to failing window shades and thermal gain, lack of insulation, and debris and particulates from crumbling plaster. You may note that many activities, such as installing storage systems, upgrading lighting systems, or implementing passive environmental control methods, are eligible for both Level 1 and Level 2 implementation projects. Both Implementation 1 and 2 projects should focus on environmentally sustainable or resilient preventive care, and projects under both levels should be ready for implementation by providing schematic designs for proposed activities. The difference between the levels comes down to the scope and size of the project and the level of prior planning. Level 1 projects are targeted for small and mid-sized institutions seeking to implement smaller, distinct preservation projects informed by a preservation assessment. Level 2 projects are larger or multifaceted preservation projects carried out by a multidisciplinary team. The planning that informs the project should have been done by a multidisciplinary team that involves several stakeholders working together to address the preservation needs of the collection. Okay, there are several important considerations when preparing your application. A detailed explanation of the review criteria is found on page 37 in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. I want to focus on 4 key areas that staff and reviewers look for in SCHC applications: humanities significance, the kind of details to include, project teams, and environmental sustainability and/or resilience. The significance of your collections to the humanities is the first main section of the narrative. Here, you have the pleasure of telling the story of your collections. Articulate why the collections are important, who uses the collections, and how your collection is significant to the work of the humanities, such as research and educational and public programming. Make your collection come alive through examples of unique or interesting objects, in addition to a more general description of the collection's scope that covers not only physical attributes, but also matters of intellectual control. For collections that might be outside the bounds of traditional humanities, such as medical or plant specimens, provide examples of research, exhibition, and other scholarship that demonstrates a connection to the humanities. After this discussion of collection significance, most of the SCHC application asks for detailed information. It is important to paint a complete and detailed picture of your project. It is appropriate to give an honest description of the collection's physical condition and collection needs. Be direct in how your project will respond to those needs. including data on temperature and humidity conditions in collection spaces, energy usage and carbon emissions, or disaster risk projections, as well as assessment reports in your application, may help provide additional information of your collection and institutional needs. For implementation projects, it is good to demonstrate that you are ready to begin the project if funds are awarded by providing plans, designs, and specifications. While data and specifications are not required to be included in the attachments, we recommend including this information. Multidisciplinary collaboration during planning and implementation to projects is essential to successful SCHC proposals. Project teams will vary based on the project, but typically consist of consultants, contracted specialists, and members of the institution's staff. Team members may include architects, building engineers, conservators, curators, archivists, facilities managers, among others. A preservation or conservation professional who works with collections must be included on your team, regardless of the level of funding you are requesting. All members of the team should be identified in the application, and they should work collaboratively in both planning and implementation stages. These do not all need to be individuals at your organization, and a great many projects rely on outside consultants, especially at the planning stages. Your application needs to demonstrate not only how your collections will benefit from the project, but how it will also advance institutional goals of environmental sustainability and/or resilience. Demonstrate how you will measure progress towards institutional environmental sustainability and resiliency goals, such as energy cost savings, reduction in carbon emissions, or use of fossil fuels, prevention of damage due to disasters, or continuity of operations after disasters. You should connect project outcomes to long-term measurable goals when possible. I'd now like to walk you through the application process for SCHC program. Any U.S. nonprofit organization with 501c3 tax-exempt status, accredited public and 501c3 institutions of higher education, a unit of state or local governmental agency, and federally recognized Native American tribal governments are eligible to apply for the SCHC grant program. Individuals, along with foreign or for-profit entities, are not eligible to apply. On page 12 of the SCHC Notice of Funding Opportunity, you will find a list of forms and attachments to include in your application. Please take careful note of which forms and attachments are required or conditionally required versus those that are recommended. Among the attachments that are required to consider your application complete and eligible for review are a narrative, a research and related budget form, detailed work plan, a list of personnel, and two-page resumes or job descriptions for all key personnel. Other attachments, such as letters of support and documentation produced during prior assessments or planning efforts, are recommended to strengthen your application, but not required. Site conditions are also recommended to be included during the application phase. If funding is awarded, site conditions would be required for projects that involve planning or implementing any modifications or changes to your building's interior, exterior, or mechanical systems. This includes most SCHC projects. You can see on the list on this slide what all those kinds of projects would entail. The site conditions section is found on pages 18 to 20 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity and consists of a list of questions that ask for details of your site, your project, and potential anticipated environmental and historic preservation impacts of the project. Answer to the best of your ability. Providing the site conditions document helps NEH determine what federal laws pertain to your project. NEH is required by federal law to review grant applications involving construction, demolition, renovation, repair, rehabilitation, or ground or visual disturbance under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, also known as Section 106 Review, and the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. Many projects are subject to Section 106 review. This process takes, on average, a few months, but may take longer depending on the complexity of the project and the nature of the site. NEH will assist you with the process after an award is made. Additional guidance on Section 106 and NEPA is available on NEH's website. Also, all construction contracts exceeding $2,000 are subject in their entirety to the Davis-Bacon Act. The Build America, Buy America Act requires that all iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials used in your project are produced in the United States. This is important when planning your budget. More information on each of these federal laws and acts is available on pages 38 to 41 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity and on the NEH website. We consider the first review stage of each application as the foundation for our entire review process. The first stage is review by a peer review panel. Their evaluation is guided by the review criteria, which are listed on page 37 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Evaluators with expertise in the types of projects represented on the panel read the applications, write comments, and post a preliminary rating. Then they meet to discuss the applications, and at which point they submit a final rating and any additional comments in support of their decision. The review criteria for SCHC listed here adheres closely to the narrative sections. Address each section of the narrative in your proposal as thoroughly as you can. Altogether, SCHC reviewers will consider humanity's significance, as we discussed earlier, methodology, attention to environmentally sustainable preventive care strategies, work plan, personnel, budget reasonableness, and project outcomes and dissemination. Before you begin your SCHC application, it is a good idea to carefully review the program's Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is downloadable as a PDF, and other important information found on the web page. There, you will find funding statistics, FAQs, and a list of sample narratives from successful applications. Applications for NEH grants, like many federal grants, are submitted through a web portal called grants.gov. If you are new to the system, I would recommend spending some time familiarizing yourself with it before you submit your application. Your institution, if it has not done so already, must register for the System for Award Management, or SAM for short, and grants.gov. You should allow several weeks to register for both. NEH will not waive the online submission requirement or extend the application deadline to allow additional time for you to complete registration with SAM or grants.gov. We strongly urge that you submit your application early to respond to any issues that you may encounter that could jeopardize your eligibility. Please note that support hours for grants.gov can change. You can resubmit the application package up until the deadline, but no materials may be added after the deadline, including letters of recommendation or parts of the package that are formatted incorrectly. Following peer review, NEH staff recommends which applications should move forward. Those recommendations are considered by the National Council on the Humanities, 26 people nominated by the President and approved by the Senate. The Council makes recommendations to the endowment's chair, who takes all this into consideration and makes the decisions on which projects to fund. As you might imagine, the life cycle of your application is quite a long process, but it allows for a rich review. After, after awards are announced, applicants can request the comments from their evaluators. If your proposal is not funded, the reviewer's comments can help you think about how to revise your proposal for next time. I strongly recommend that you reach out to a program officer with a short description of your project in the early stages of the project development. We are more than happy to meet with you and discuss your project. We will be able to assist you to determine whether SCHC is the right fit for your project, as well as help determine which level of funding may be most appropriate for your needs. Also, you may send us a draft of your application to review and provide guidance. The deadline is December 7th, 2023. The draft can be in any stage of completion. We are happy to read what you have prepared. Make plenty of enough time to study the guidelines, prepare the scope of your project, consult with stakeholders such as facility staff, administration, and outside consultants in the planning and grant writing process. Evidence of an underprepared application tend to appear in the budget that does not adequately reflect the project activities, or an underdeveloped discussion of the significance of your project. Remember to adhere to page limits and file formats for all components of your application. Failure to allow this guidance will result in your application being declared ineligible. Finally, whether or not you are funded, you should request feedback from your program officer after awards are made. I realize that I have presented a lot of information here. You can find the notice of funding opportunity along with other useful information such as successful application narratives on our website, NEH.gov. Program staff are always available to discuss your project and assist you with questions about preparing and submitting your application. We are a friendly bunch and we are here to help. You can contact us through our division email address or contact me directly. Have a fantastic day, and I really look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.